I have 9 questions that I will ask each of them to weigh in on, either individually or as a group. And there will be a time limit on these questions. We have a total of 1 hour and 45 minutes for the panel to address my questions, and the last 15 minutes is open for audience questions. As such, I will be attempting to strictly enforce speaking limits, though it's always really hard to interrupt someone mid-sentence. So we'll see how that goes. Background on the topic of food is almost unnecessary. We all eat, we all consume food, and as of late, the question of where food comes from has been gaining a lot of attention. On our campus, we consume a lot of food. We have a lot of people. We have unions, dining halls, cafes, markets, and this just makes the question of food purchasing all the more relevant. With that, I think I'll turn it over to our panel and let them give a 2-minute introduction, or let each of them give a 2-minute introduction of who they are, who they represent, and in what areas they are involved or have expertise. And yeah, the mic, you can just pass it on down the line. I think it's on.
It needs to be turned on.
It's not on.
Just leave it here, or do you done? Does that work? Can everyone hear me? Okay. Hopefully. My name is Angie Erickson, and I work in housing, and I'm Assistant Director of Dining Services, and I oversee purchasing for the residence hall dining units. I've been there for 8 years in this position, and within this position I work very closely with Jeff Orr, our executive chef, and getting the menu set and what he wants us to purchase for food. And then I also work very closely with campus purchasing services and writing our contracts and dealing with the vendors.
I'm Erin Silva. I'm an organic production specialist. I have an appointment with UW Extension and also the Department of Agronomy, and I work very broadly in organic systems. So I work with the state's dairy producers, our vegetable producers, and our row crop producers. And I work very closely with a lot of the small and mid-sized organic vegetable farms throughout the state with various production programming, looking at profitability issues with our organic vegetable farms throughout the state, and over the past 6 months or so have been working with Jeff Orr and Housing Dining, looking at what it would take to procure specifically leafy greens in the dining halls, and have been funded through the Office of Sustainability to continue to investigate that question through the upcoming year.
Hi, I'm Jeff Orr. I'm the executive chef for Housing Dining. I work closely with Angie, as she mentioned, in sourcing products, whether local or not, setting menus, setting standards, that sort of thing. And I've been in my position for about 2.5 years, we've been somewhat systematically kind of approaching categories of products and assessing changes we should make and that sort of thing. So we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about some of those changes we've made.
Hi, I'm Tom Boyden. I'm the Urban Agriculture Director for FH King, Students for Sustainable Agriculture, as well as the Communications Director for Slow Food. But I'm not going to be talking anything about slow food today. I am more so on the growing side of real food, and now I'm looking more into the intersect of media, agriculture, and food.
Hi, I'm Paige Kelly. I am the Program Director for FH King Students for Sustainable Agriculture, as well as the Outreach Director for Slow Food UW. I just have done a lot. I planned the Real Food Week this year along with my coworker Kara, who's the Administrative Director for FH King. So I've been really looking into the feasibility and issues surrounding getting real food into our dining halls. So.
Cool. Well, thank you all for being here. So I guess with that, I'll jump straight into questions. It's kind of an awkward transition, but we're all here to discuss food. So The first question I have is for Jeff and/or Angie. And that is just, could you please elaborate on the ways in which food purchasing works on campus? Does it differ departmentally, for example, between the unions and dining halls? And there are more questions stemming off of that. We can start with that. There's a rough time limit of 9 minutes, but I don't expect this first one to take that long.
So union, housing, and athletics as well, we share contracts on campus. We work with each other and with campus services to make sure that the language in the contracts meets all of our needs. But we do have the autonomy within each contract to purchase the food that we want. So a chicken sandwich at housing is going to be different than a chicken sandwich in the union. So we can purchase all of our different needs and food of what we want. But we do share the contracts and pricing and whatnot. Let's see here. We do also see a benefit if maybe we have different chicken sandwiches, but there is a benefit if we all use the same brand. We'll see pricing deviations and things like that. So sometimes we work to consolidate our product lines to improve our purchasing power that way. And we do try to work local purchasing into our contracts. We score on proposals for bids that go out. We do have the language where they have to tell us how they partner with local food sources to help the university achieve the goal of 10 to 20% of food purchase being from local sources. So they respond to that question and we apply points based on their response.
Could you elaborate a bit on that last point of the language in the contract and just how, how that came to be, or how, I guess, yeah, where the goal of 10 to 20% came from?
I believe it stemmed from a bill that was introduced into the legislature that would require 20% of our purchases be from local sources. Right now that's not defined what local means. We interpret it as being state of Wisconsin, but we're asking for a better definition. So.
All right, and then kind of going off of that, because I just have a bunch of questions about the sort of purchasing end of food. From your end, is purchasing based, decided by demand, or is it decided by cost, or is it really kind of up in the air? So what are the main determinants of?
There's a lot of different factors that come into play. First, we look at the menu, what we want to offer, what's selling. We look at price. We look at the quality of food. Are we able to source it? That's a big one too.
All right, and sorry.
Oh, I mean that's. I can speak loudly enough. That's a tough question because we only buy what we need, but what we choose. We are an a la carte business, which means that our customers, we don't have an all-you-can-eat food plan in the dorms. So our students are free to choose. We're free to spend their money wherever they choose, and so we need to be responsive to their demands and what can sell. But as Angie mentioned, being able to get something reliably, consistently to our specifications is not so easy, even with large vendors. We go through, Angie's got some statistics that she can talk about later, but I mean, it's a tremendous volume of food, and so to source a single product from 5 or 6 different places to ship out to all of our various units it poses a great deal of administrative burden on us. So nevertheless, we still make a lot of changes based on what we want to do, and maybe not necessarily just purely responsive to demand, but helping to create demand in things that we think are important.
Great. I guess, just to sort of keep on this riff, you mentioned that there were some statistics about how much food is used. And I think that would just be really interesting for everyone to sort of get a sense of scale.
So I pulled our local food purchases. I always report it by fiscal year. So in fiscal year 12 to 13, we spent about $8,600,000 in food. And for our local purchases, it was about 11.3% of that expenditure. A big amount of that is from UW Campus Dairy. So we buy all of our milk and ice cream through them, and that made up almost 8% of that 11%. So. And then we also looked at local vendors, and we were at about 10.8% there. And then foods that were just manufactured within the state of Wisconsin. So it might not be a true local food, but it was made here in the state. And that was at 32%. So, and then I also pulled, just looking to see how much processed produce we go through in a year, because that seems to be a big part of what people think of when they think of local purchasing. And for our processed produce, so we buy our onions chopped, our fruits already cut up. We went through 502,000 pounds of just processed produce that year, and 70,000 pounds of that was lettuce, spring mix, or spinach. We go through a lot.
Angie was talking about processed produce, and that, just to provide a little bit of background, we, that's in large part dictated by our staffing. We have, depending on how well staffed we are, we have a ratio of say between 10 to 14 to 1 student staff to permanent staff. And having that many student employees, that high of a proportion of student employees, presents problems in the sense of being able to train them. So largely, our produce comes in prepped because that would be a lot of people we'd have to teach how to use a knife, a lot of people. And so having the produce arrive that way really speeds things up and enables us to produce the volume and quality we need to for the satisfaction of our customers.
Great, thank you so much for weighing in on that. So the next question I have is just for everyone to briefly weigh in on, or not briefly, but preferably briefly. And that is, could you discuss what sustainable food sourcing means to you? I know I heard both of you talking about local a lot, but even sort of more broadly on that, more broadly than that, what is sustainable food sourcing, and what would it look like through your eyes to see the campus source its food sustainably? I can give you each a minute to think that one over, because it's a pretty big question.
I'll start. I think we've all heard these keywords in the media: local, organic, and it's hard to define those, like we've already talked about. And something that goes along with some other verbiage like community-based and ecologically sound helps to explain it, but it's not just those words. I think the sustainable food comes from education and getting people engaged in the sustainable food, because if you don't have this impact in the students that makes them, or not makes them, but allows them to think about this in a different way, then it's not going to be sustainable. Because we still have this, every 4 years there's more and more people, and you need to have the education there to keep that sustainable.
Yeah, so going off that, I think personally, having been involved with slow food, there's definitely a certain aesthetic to, when you experience what I would call sustainable food, there's an aesthetic in it, and I think that is the education portion. So it's an understanding of what food choices you're making and the impact that they have. So when I'm buying a hamburger, understanding that if I'm buying it for $2, it's probably because, farmers were feeding their cattle corn, and they were in feedlots, and the actual impacts of that. So I think for me, a sustainable food system includes education and understanding of where your food comes from. And so every time you're sitting down, whether or not you're making what I would say are good choices, you're having a conversation about the choices you're making. So,
it's a really big question. I would just add that the sustainability of our business, of the ability of our residents to afford the food that we sell are extremely important. The sustainability of our staff, being able to engage them, and I think that there's some opportunities to connect our staff a little bit more with the food that they serve if they feel more of a connection to where it came from. So I see some opportunities there. But I think that it's really a complex issue for us because there's so many different moving parts to this. But I wouldn't disagree with anything that was said prior about the aesthetics and the community. And we do look for those opportunities, but so I'm not going to answer your question about what sustainable food sourcing would look like because I'm not sure I really envision something so grand. We tend to kind of focus on a product or a category where we can make the most impact and make sure that it works within our business model and with the way that we can staff our buildings.
I think Jeff makes some great points. As when that question was first posed to me in terms of being phrased as sustainable food purchasing, what really got highlighted to me was the purchasing component versus the sustainable agriculture component. And as Jeff mentioned, in terms of what that means for UW, you have to take into account what does that mean for the economics, what does that mean for the personnel, potentially what does that mean for the health of our students, and what does it mean with respect to being able to sustainably purchase that from whatever agricultural system that we are sourcing from. And it's not in terms of looking at and focusing on the agriculture, particularly in a state like Wisconsin where we do have seasonal purchasing and we do have a diversity of approaches throughout the state. It's not going to be necessarily a one-size-fits-all answer. And one of the strengths of Wisconsin agriculture is the diversity of approaches, that we do have a diversity of size of farms. We have a diversity in approaches of farms, whether it be rotational grazing system for dairy, whether it be organic, whether it be low input, or whether it be conventional. And I think that maintaining that diversity in terms of where we're sourcing from and respecting that diversity is important. And it's hard to answer that in a sentence or two because diversity plays so strongly into what a sustainable food purchasing system might mean.
I don't think I have much more to add.
All right. Well, there were a lot of things said there, but sort of just to sum up, and if you have anything you'd like to add, kind of what I heard is it's very much about the people involved with the food, both on the production and the agriculture, and then the, I guess, next step of the line, the sort of preparation of the food and the education involved, and then the actual consumption of the food and the affordability. And so what was interesting to me is that I didn't really hear, organic or local come up in any of your descriptions. And I was wondering if any of you had any thoughts on that. It's fine if you don't. But just sort of how it's sustainable food is so people-centric.
I'll start. Personally, I don't, the stamp of approval by the government saying that something is certified organic doesn't mean that much to me. Before I came to the university, I used to be a restaurant owner, and I placed a lot more emphasis on what was the grower doing on the farm. And whether or not that grower sought certification or not, I looked at what they did, and that was more important to me than whether they had some kind of designation. If I liked the product and I liked what they were doing, that was good enough for me. Local, for me, has always come out of what kind of relationship do I have with the person or people producing the food. Because, as a chef, my first focus is on the quality of the product. And if I couldn't get anything I liked locally, I probably wouldn't buy anything locally. But the truth is, especially when it comes to produce, you know, I'm going to be able to get higher quality products from local sources, and I want to be first in line, quite honestly. I want the best stuff that they've got. So I need those relationships. So local, that's where I come at local. Now, all the ancillary benefits to that, keeping money in the local economy, reducing the expense of fossil fuels, and the not just the monetary expense, but the expense on the environment. Those are I feel good about those things, but that's not my primary motivation. So that, I mean, it's a little dirty little secret, but that's where I come at it from. So it just happens that those are the best sources for me.
I guess in terms of organic or local being essential to the definition of sustainable, in terms of, I can get into a whole other discussion on, looking at some life cycle analysis and looking at, what are the costs, and broader than, the economic costs, but what are the added costs of producing organic or conventional? And again, I don't necessarily think it's a one-size-fits-all answer. Organic, when looking at the cost, particularly with fossil fuel and CO2 emissions, a lot of the footprint that goes into agriculture is tied to synthetic fertilizers, and organic tends to use less of that. So overall, if you're looking at purchasing organic at the height of the season, it probably, if you're looking at that as the metric, a more sustainable source. But there's other metrics involved, and it gets complex in terms of trying to, I guess, determine what is the most sustainable system. So I don't think that either organic or local is essential for the definition of sustainable. And again, whether or not I think as we change and start to implement newer technology into our agricultural production systems with different sorts of energy efficient lighting for greenhouses, or different ways of potentially heating some of our controlled atmosphere structures, things might change. But currently, if you look at what is the benefit in terms of greater environmental impact of buying leafy greens that were produced that need supplemental light or heat versus potentially sourcing them from either a non-local source, but hopefully the most efficient source possible with respect to freight, those numbers may not necessarily balance out. And then you have to go back, again, this is complex, what are the other benefits of potentially keeping a farm in business for 12 months of the year with the stability of that and sustainability of that business. So there's a lot of factors that go into it that you have to think about, I guess.
Yeah, so I think there was a lot, you guys touched on a lot of what I wanted to say, but to me, like the phrases of organic and local aren't, I mean, they're going to be defined in so many ways that it's hard to just like pinpoint it as like the cure-all. But, I've talked about local, I think it should be, you should kind of dismiss the whole concept of local, because that's always been an issue, is like, how do you define it? And rather it's about those relationships and it being community-based and building partnerships. And to me, we are an agricultural state, we're an agricultural university, and it's well within like the mission of our university to be trying to support as many Wisconsin farmers as possible. And doing that with the food that we're purchasing is like the most upfront way of doing that. And so to me, a sustainable university, a sustainable agricultural university should be emphasizing that in its purchasing. So.
Do anyone else have anything to add? Otherwise, we will move to the next question, which is for Paige and Tom. And that is, I think one or both of you mentioned Real Food Week in your discussion, and I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on what the organizations and campaigns you're associated with what they're asking of campus. Yeah.
Okay.
Just start there.
Yeah, so Real Food Week was inspired by, there's an internet or a national organization called the Real Food Challenge, and their measures of what they deem real food are community-based, ecologically sound, fair, and humane. I personally like that a little bit better than some of the discussions that have been had about just local, because I think it's a little more holistic, and it approaches food from more of a social, environmental, and economic standpoint. So I think that's a much better and more reasonable approach to thinking about sourcing in general. But, you know, we've talked with Aaron and Jeff before, and, you know, it's, the Real Food Challenge asks that universities sign commitments that say they'll commit 20% of their food budget to real food sourcing. I think that's a really honest and realistic goal, especially for our university. So that's something that I would like to see, but more so I think it would be about us having a conversation about what does our definition of real food look like. So I'm gonna let you step in.
Yeah, and I can go off our definition of real food. The Real Food Challenge is more of a foundation of how other universities have done it. And they use things like a real food calculator, which again is not an end-all solution to figuring out what is real food. So we're using that as kind of a basis for the campaign or the commitments of the university here, but it's not the overarching guidelines that we're going by.
So I guess I would just ask, you know, what, can you go a bit more in depth as to what you mean by real food? I mean, you said local, humane, and ecologically sound. I may have missed one in there. But is there anything sort of beyond that? You know, because we were talking earlier about the complexities and nuances, and those words may not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, again, going back to what I said previously, that it's about engaging our state producers in what we're choosing to purchase. So to me, there's something a lot more sustainable in a food system or a UW sourcing system that emphasizes Wisconsin farmers no matter whether or not they're producing organically or conventionally, just based on the fact that that should be something that as a Wisconsin Institute that we are encouraging. I also think that there's a big education component that needs to be included in that, because, you know, Jeff and Aaron have done a lot already to take steps towards getting more real food into the dining halls and really engaging students in the conversation of what's changed, what could change is going to be a big part of that. So, you good?
That's great.
Would any of the other panelists like to weigh in on sort of what, on real food or what, yeah.
Well, actually, I'll ask Angie a question. I would imagine that words like fair and humane would be a difficult thing for us to monitor and govern, and so that would be, I think you probably wouldn't get too many people saying, well, of course, food should be, you know, fair to those who, to everybody, and also we should be humanely raised. But then, what are those standards, and then how would we possibly enforce something like that? So I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, and we have over 7,000 different items in our ordering system, so trying to track each and every product would be a real challenge.
Do you have anything you'd like to add there?
I really like Paige's point that I think that it's I have to admit, I've told you guys this, I don't like the term real food. I like the concept behind it. I feel real food, the descriptor real, it can be polarizing and is not necessarily reflective of what this is trying to do, which I think it's great that this is a starting point. And I also think it's great that we as a university community think, you know, starting with this as the metrics and the concept, what do we want to do with our university, with the landscape of the agriculture in our state, which again, Wisconsin is absolutely blessed with having a robust dairy and livestock and vegetable industry. There's not very many places across the country that have a profile like we do here in Wisconsin. Now, what does this mean for us as a university community, and then start to define it with a university-wide discussion.
Just going off of that, I know I'm familiar with both of your organizations beyond Real Food Week, and I'm just wondering if for everyone here you could just briefly elaborate on what FH King and what Slow Food do aside from Real Food.
Sure. Being in both organizations, I know a bit about what's going on, and most people see me everywhere. When it comes to food, I'm usually taking pictures and doing videos, and FH King is, well, the goal of FH King is to establish a relationship between community, land, and food on the UW campus. So we do that through our garden is kind of the epicenter of the whole organization, and Slow Food is more on the cooking, preparing, and engaging students on that. And we're more on the growing side. So we have a pile center, we have a rooftop garden, and we're looking at other opportunities to grow on campus because the Eagle Heights garden it's a bit of a trek. It's a 10-minute bike ride, which is beautiful. But it's also a little off campus, and we're doing more workshops on campus to really put these growing supplies and preparing into students' hands.
Yeah, so I'm also in both organizations. So for FH King, I'm in charge of workshop series. So we've done series on fermentation and preservation. So kind of just what do you do with your food once you have it and want to keep it around. And then the last one was really like at home growing. So we had vertical garden. We did vermicomposting. What else did we do?
Sprouts.
Oh yeah, we did sprouting. So just kind of at home growing. From the slow food side, you know, we're a really diverse organization in the fact that we have weekly cafes and weekly dinners. We work with the Boys and Girls Club in South Madison to teach them about growing food, but also just engaging them with like healthy food options. And then as the outreach director, we're doing workshops, cooking workshops. We're going into the dorms and doing more workshops on cooking, but also talking to them about food as an issue, and then partnering with community. So like Redante, we do a monthly dinner and a movie with different student organizations. So from the slow food side, I think both organizations really emphasizing advocacy and education about, you know, both growing food and the importance of cooking and thinking about food.
Yeah, it does. And it leads really nicely into my next question. And that is, both of you mentioned growing food to some degree. And, you know, one of the questions I've had, because I've heard the topic come up, or I've heard the question come up, is, you know, what are the possibilities of growing the food we eat, growing that, or some of that, on campus? Especially given the consideration that Wisconsin has a long winter, starting from about November and going through March. You know, so what is the sustainability of growing food on our own campus?
Sure. So FH King has a 2-acre garden, and just to put it in perspective, say we want to source green onions to the dining hall. We would have to basically fill our entire 2-acre garden with green onions and abandon all crop rotation, all soil management. Really, just it's not really plausible unless we have over 50 acres to supply some of the food to the campus. And it's more, growing on campus is more of a tool to engage students and have this very tangible notion that you can touch, smell, and eat this food. And say growing an edible landscape like other campuses in Loyola Chicago, University of Minnesota Duluth, it also engages people that aren't FH King that are just focused on the growing. It has student organizations like Sex Out Loud running a garden about, I don't know, aphrodisiac vegetables, and certain organizations like the multicultural students, all kinds of organizations coming together to grow food and kind of get that ground level base of where it comes from. So the idea of growing on campus, I know it's been talked a lot about in rooftops, and this kind of requires it to be talked about at the beginning of the conversation. Say an example of that is the new nursing school will have a rooftop garden on there, and that conversation started very early, so it was a possibility. But putting rooftop gardens to provide leafy greens for Gordon Commons is not something that would work.
Does anyone else want to weigh in?
And Aaron's got great input.
I think those are great points, and I think one of the sticking points are roadblocks that potentially in these discussions that I've encountered is it has to be an all or nothing enterprise, and that is not necessarily the case, and that's been one of the real great outcomes of working with Jeff is that with him it's not an all or nothing deal where it has to all be local or nothing can be local. So I think, as Tom said, it'd be really difficult with the space and the labor limitations to supply even if it was in the growing season, within our typical March through November growing season, it'd be really difficult to supply all of the produce on campus, but is that really the aim and all the other potential benefits of potentially supplying some of the produce to campus? And there are examples of other universities, even another UW institution, UW-Milwaukee, that's doing this. And they're focusing more on one particular food service outlet, but they have a rooftop garden where they are supplying produce from that rooftop garden directly into that particular, I think it's more of like one of these units down here at Union South, but it is being done even within our state. So it's definitely something that we could do if the resources were in place. That UW-Milwaukee example does have a part-time farmer for the stability from year to year, and that employee, that stable employee versus the students that are busy with classes and work and other responsibilities. So I do think it's essential that there would be potentially a permanent staff person on campus, at least one permanent staff person to make sure that this was followed through and all the, make sure that the produce was of good quality and the food safety standards were there. But if we're looking at making inroads, I don't think it's an insurmountable task.
Do you have anything to add to that, Jeff or Angie? Particularly from perspective of, all right, now you have all this food coming in, what's the safety of it, what's the quality, are there any concerns there?
There's concerns, but I think that, as Aaron said, they're not insurmountable. I think that quality is fairly easy to assess, and that's the sort of thing that you gain by working closely with who's growing it. Safety is always a paramount issue, but these are easy things to fix, and those are best agricultural practices anyway. And I was just going to throw one more wrinkle in, which is it's not so simple for someone to grow something on campus and drop it off at our door. We found that. So there's a whole host of things that govern how we can get products in and that sort of thing, and who's allowed to deliver and that sort of thing. So these are issues that we confronted when we were doing this Leafy Greens project. So, and we found an interesting solution, I think, with a local vendor who was interested in making more inroads into developing some more relationships with local growers, and was willing to make deliveries to us, and it sort of bridged that gap between the grower and us. Because just in part because of the sheer volume, and also because of some of the rules that govern our purchasing, that a vendor, in a sense, there's another hand, reaching into your pocket, but it really helps solve a whole host of problems.
Do you want to elaborate on any of those sort of the wrinkles in delivery from farm gate to university door?
Well, maybe I'll have Angie talk about some of the constraints, I'll call them.
Well, the first one that we typically run into an issue with is the insurance requirements for campus, and anyone that delivers to us has to have $1 million liability, and that becomes an issue for small farms. And then delivery as well, we don't allow deliveries to come in personal cars. They need to be in temperature controlled vehicles. So that becomes an issue as well. Other things that we've found challenging is we've tried to do some of these purchases is just having products available in the quantities we need. If we're buying tomatoes, we can't bring it in from 3 different vendors. We want to just be able to go to one source and get it. Lead time of orders has been an issue as well. We buy local tofu, and right now we have to give a week's notice, and we get 1 day a week delivery from this vendor. And it's a challenge because a lot of times the units run out and they need more, and we have to scramble to find another source to get product. Many of our vendors, our prime vendor, our produce vendors, they deliver 6 days a week to us, so we're used to getting many deliveries. Ease of ordering is also an issue that we face. Right, a lot of our vendors will send their orders electronically or via email, and we found that, again, with our local tofu vendor, everything's a phone call. They don't have email, we don't have fax, but, so that's always a phone call. And then, I guess those were the points.
All right, and could you discuss sort of how, you mentioned that there was one vendor that you used, and how, just maybe a bit of the story behind that, and how that's ended up working out? Or?
Sure. So I'll trace at least our experience through this past summer, which is extremely valuable for me to go through. And I just want to, before telling that story, because I think it touches upon it, well, part of the story is following some of the work that Natasha Smith, a graduate student of Jack Kloppenberg, did or had. And she worked on this issue of local food procurement, and she came up with 15 different barriers, which 15's a lot, but some of them are more barriers than others. Receiving adequate and consistent quality of supply, logistics of delivery, payment procedures, and ease of ordering, limited time of food service professionals. So literally, like, does Jeff have time to make all these phone calls? Does Angie have time to make all these phone calls? Price of the local products, labor, having people there in the dining facilities to prep it, existing suppliers, contract limitations of multiple vendors, central distribution and processing facilities, seasonality, product sourcing, liability, insurance, food safety, storage of the local products, sustaining a market with student turnover, and institutional bureaucracies and inertia. So as we worked through this, and Jack and Natasha brought myself and another colleague, Russ Groves, into the discussion because of our contacts with local farmers, it wasn't too difficult to, knowing what farmers exist in Wisconsin, to find some farmers that could produce a fair volume, and they're still relatively small farms on a 20-acre scale, but they were growing enough that they had already some wholesale or some restaurant contracts, and they knew how to deliver good product, they knew how to schedule. So Jeff and I, with a couple other students, went out to the farms, talked to the farmers, actually visited their packing facilities, saw some of the product, felt confident that this relationship could work, and talked about some prices, and everything looked like it was going to work out. They planted, we had to give them enough lead time so they could plant the product specifically for UW. They planted the product, everything was going well. We started to talk about actually it coming in. This is around September, after they planted the product, and then started to get into some of the liability and insurance issues, and had a few sleepless nights as I started to learn more about what went into the, what were the requirements for liability insurance. And from the farmers that I work with, which typically are CSA growers, they typically are doing some farmers market. But again, these two farmers that we specifically chose this fall, we chose in part because they were already selling into Metcalfe's. They were already selling into the Madison sourdough restaurants. So they had pretty good insurance policies already. They had this $1 million liability insurance. And beyond just the insurance of the product, what was interesting, and this alludes to what Jeff and Angie said about, you can't just drop off the product. they had to have certain levels of workman's comp in case, I guess, one of their workers got injured when they were dropping off the produce at UW. They had to have vehicle insurance at certain levels, and farmers don't necessarily think about that when they're thinking about, you know, what is my farm liability policy? They're thinking more about, you know, am I insuring the product, not like what are my vehicle and vehicle and farm liability are on two different policies, so they had to work with two different agents. And then UW had to actually be listed on the policy as a co-insured, and that's kind of when it was like, whoa. Also for philosophical reasons, it costs more to put UW on the policy for these small growers, and just philosophically, like, why am I as the grower insuring UW? Why aren't they insuring themselves for this liability? So that's where things became really problematic. Also, these smaller growers are, they're busy. You know, they're looking at, they have other markets, and for the volumes that we're talking about and for the use and the storage availability here at UW, ideally it needed to be dropped off every day or every other day. And some of the farmers I talked to said, you know, I'm not willing to make a trip in to drop off the produce more than once a week into Madison. It's just, it's going to take too much time. I just don't have the resources to do that. So those were the major barriers, the liability, the insurance, and just being able to drop off more than once a week here into town. So the solution that Jeff thankfully thought up, because I don't know if we would have been able to continue without this solution, is going through a local vendor, Golden Produce, who's right here in town, so still supporting a small local business, who essentially acted as an aggregator. And the farmers were able to then drop off their produce at that business. That business had all these levels of liability insurance. They were able to basically meet that delivery schedule, and everything went forward. But it was definitely a different approach. So I think in terms of, you know, looking at moving this forward on a larger scale, we're going to have to continue to look at potentially working with those aggregators, be it the one that we've been working with, or some of the newer different establishments that are coming onto the scene, such as the Southern Wisconsin Food Hub, which is a fairly recent organization to emerge. They've had some changes in leadership, but hopefully as some of those different types of structures emerge, this will become easier. But right now there are some significant barriers, and obviously not insurmountable, because we managed to get those products within Gordon Commons, but it was definitely, again, some sleepless nights trying to figure it all out.
Yeah, Angie mentioned 70,000 pounds of leafy greens a year, and that's, you know, 3-pound case of leafy greens is about this big. So that's an awful lot, and during the lion's share of that is during the school year. So it's an awful lot, and it wasn't even an issue of quality or shelf life that we were concerned about with once or twice a week deliveries. We simply haven't built our facilities to have storage for that kind of bulk. So that's in part why we need this stuff. It's not just for our ease and or anything else really. It's just we just don't have the physical space, and thankfully RE Golden Produce was able to take delivery like that and then just sort of, you know, meet it out in the doses we needed to. So.
And just out of curiosity, how much, you mentioned that some of that food ended up, you know, going to Gordon Commons. What is the extent of that? Do you have specific statistics, or even just a rough amount?
I think we managed to source about 200. I think we managed to source about 200 pounds per week, which was the estimate from previous years, and with the quality of the food, both in terms of, you know, the food and the dining facilities themselves going up with now this new facility at Union South and the new facility at Gordon Commons, there may have been, I don't know if that met all the demand for 2 weeks, but it was about 200 pounds per week, I think.
It worked out well for us. I mean, and that's actually not all the leafy greens we have at the time, but we identified a couple of products that we would put just on our salad bars. No, that worked well for us. I mean, it was a really, I thought it went extremely well, and we learned quite a bit about the whole process. And also, it was nice for our staff that some of the products came in a processed and washed format, but others we had to process. And we do have accommodations in both our Four Lakes, which is in the new DeJoe Hall, and at Gordon Dining and Event Center. We have facilities there for processing local produce. It's rather small, but we did have everything we needed to be able to do that. And it was nice to see it not just used as a storage facility for a while. So.
Just one thing. And I think that just goes that it's not something that's just going to apparate out of thin air. This is a long process, and not only working, say, with the food hub will benefit them in gaining hoop houses or storage facilities, but the facilities that we have currently will continue to work better with what they're trying to do in terms of source locally. And both on the producer side and the distributing side, it's gonna take a lot of effort and fluidity to make it work.
Yeah, and going off that, I think like the steps that Aaron and Jeff are taking really act as a means of like encouraging farmers to invest in some of the necessary steps or facilities to source to the university. Farmers aren't going to invest in capital that they don't know that will be paid off, and so having contracts with the university that are guaranteed really encourage them to take steps to be able to source to places like UW or Metcalf. And so UW has an opportunity really to sponsor its own farmers in the state by sourcing from them.
Cool. Thank you all for that. That was a really very interesting discussion for me. A lot of that I didn't know. And you mentioned a lot of sort of logistical hurdles within the sort of whole system of buying and selling food. And one that is almost so obvious that we don't think of it is the issue of seasonality, and how do you go about sourcing local food, sustainable food, whatever it may be, in Wisconsin with the duration of our winters. I mean, what happens in the middle of February if you're trying to source more locally grown or real food, or whatever definition you're using? And this is for everyone, just sort of to weigh in on, but particularly people with experience purchasing food.
I guess I can just, so slow food, UW really emphasizes seasonality and sourcing from Wisconsin. So I was a cook in the cafe that runs on Wednesdays, and I know that March is the worst season ever for vegetables in Wisconsin. And really having a Wisconsin cuisine becomes hard when you have potatoes and beets, basically. But I don't think it's, I think what the takeaway should be is that it's not an all or nothing thing. So menus can reflect Wisconsin growing seasons, and they can emphasize that. I also think it's a lot more creative and fun for people who are cooking and eating to experience the change in seasonality. But it doesn't need to be that once greens are gone in Wisconsin that we can't source greens. It should just be that when there are greens in Wisconsin, we should be emphasizing that we're purchasing greens from Wisconsin. And, we can have beets and salads instead of, tomatoes, or things like that. But, starting to develop some of those, what can we purchase from Wisconsin, and making a Wisconsin seasonality cuisine more focused on campus, I guess. Yeah.
And just quickly, the relationship that would exist between the university and, say, cooperatives or hubs would just lead to much more knowledge coming from extension to these organizations and farmers, and the kind of rigors of winter would be a hurdle that they could get over a bit easier while working together. And that already exists, but having a contract or this already sourcing from these farmers would even strengthen that relationship more.
In my life as a restaurant owner, I a lot of customers who tire of root vegetables by March and April. It's impossible to keep offering that for five months at a time. But we've done a lot of things to take advantage of what is available to us, and growers are ingenious about extending seasons, and they're getting better and better at that. And I think that was one of the reasons we were really interested in. I thought leafy greens was a really good kind of first step in a major category for us, because it is something that a lot of growers have licked, the problem of the 12 months of production. There's usually a gap right at the beginning of January that seems to be troublesome, but we're closed then. So I thought it was a good thing that we could probably offer, if not the very same product year-round, at least something year-round that could be sourced that way. But we've done some other things. I purchased tomato seconds at the end of the growing season, and I didn't really jump on it early enough this year, so I didn't get as much as I wanted. But we went through, I want to say, over 10,000 pounds of tomatoes that I bought from a local source a while back. It took us, I think, about 8 months to go through that in a single product. We use it to make a roasted tomato salsa, so the frozen tomatoes can sit in our freezer. We bring them on as we need to. We roast them. We make a salsa. So we went through over 10,000 pounds in a semester and a half just on that single product. So and next year I'm going to do a better job at getting even more. Because I think we can go through easily twice that much. So there's a lot of opportunities to do things like that. And again, we were talking about before, this is not an all or nothing approach for me. We'll do the best we can, and we'll look for more opportunities to do it. But we would never be in a position where we would be sourcing Wisconsin products year-round. I don't think we would have too many residents if that were the case. And a big part of this is education and convincing our residents, many of whom are freshmen, of the importance of eating this way. And this is a major change for them. These aren't necessarily students who have been on campus for 2 and 3 and 4 years who have had a chance to sort of maybe change their minds or learn more about these sorts of things. So they're kind of a tough nut to crack.
If we just look at the leafy green case study, as Paige and Tom have both mentioned, it's a give and take a bit, and it's really exciting to see these relationships evolve, because I got an email a couple weeks ago. One of the farmers that we did source, he wanted Jeff's opinion on the quality of the product, was really interested in already talking about putting his seed orders into growing more product for UW next year. And ideally, if we look at he has some hoop houses, but if he's looking at keeping the product growing within those hoop houses for the longest length of time, and just again, taking leafy greens as a case study, he's probably going to be growing in even the September time frame a salad mix that's probably more heat-tolerant lettuces. And as that kind of changes into November and even December, that product is going to start getting more into the Asian greens, the baby kales, the mizuna. So on the salad bar, you're not going to see a consistent product. The students are going to have one salad mix, and then it's going to evolve into another salad mix. And I think most of us in the room are here because we're interested in food, and we really like food, and probably that would appeal to us. But again, it really, I think, goes back to education and potentially having the students, they're asking, why the heck is a salad never the same on the salad bar? Why can't I just get my lettuce? But having, and I'm not sure the best way to do this with the freshmen coming into the dining facilities, but really using it as an experience. And I think the approach of having potentially and maybe there are some people that just want the lettuce no matter what, that's what they like. But to have it so that on this salad bar and this place in the salad bar, this is what it is, and it changes, and it's explained, why is it changing, and we had that in part with the experience this past October. We had a sign on the salad bar that showed a picture of the farm and said these are former UW students and they're growing 20 miles from campus. So kind of integrate that again as we really, strategically look at really reshaping what we're doing here on campus. So I think the education too is key. I kind of veered off of seasonality and doing year-long production, but really the reality is I think there is going to have to be an education component, even if we're looking at trying to extend the season here in Wisconsin.
I think the university community should get behind changing the academic year around the growing season.
A really long winter break.
Yeah, the football team would be happy about fall starting in March, but whatever.
So the next question I have is very much related to what we were just talking about, and sort of different types of vegetables and different types of foods coming in that are, you know, local or from, you know, producers that the university knows. And it's kind of, you know, what do each of you see as sort of the most important foods to source sustainably? Or is it meat or eggs? You know, the list goes on. And sort of what are the reasons behind that? Yeah, I'll just leave it open-ended like that. And if people need a second to think about that, that's another big question that dropped out of nowhere.
I'll just go off what I know that Jeff has tried. I know that there's grass-fed beef that was put into some of the campus.
All of our burgers.
All of the burgers. So all of the burgers at Gordon Commons, or
all of it, at all of housing.
At all of housing. So that's an enormous task. And I think, I mean, meat is just something Wisconsin loves. We love cheese and meat, and it's also one of the things you have to think about more in depth than, say, produce, because it is, like, as a meat eater, I'm saying that it is one of the most unsustainable things to do, is to eat a ton of meat. And but making decisions to source from a farm that uses grass-fed or uses grass to feed their cows and are, as Joel Salton says, are grass farmers. That is a really important thing to look at. And produce and greens, that is huge, but meat consumption and dairy is a really big thing, and that also, again, back to the education aspect, do many people know the cost of their hamburger, or what it actually is costing the farmer, the animal, and the land?
When I think of, if I'm going to focus on a single product, to source in a particular way and seek a new source for it, usually what I think about is how can I connect our customer with that food. And so I give the example of, you know, the burger is a really good one, because that's what you're getting is the burger. And the leafy greens, I think, is the same thing. It's you know, for the customer to put a salad together and say those leafy greens were in the ground just a few days ago. I think there's a real direct connection that helps change their minds a little bit about food and about who we are. And that would be, I think, a far more direct connection and maybe a good first step, as opposed to say, oh, by the way, the carrots in your minestrone, so 10% of those came from a local source. And it's like, well, so what? I mean, it's a good thing, but it doesn't really educate anybody. So that's kind of what I look at is, you know, where can we make the most impact and have the most direct connection to our customer to help change their minds about things.
I guess I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach on this and emphasize the produce aspect, particularly because I think Wisconsin has a real opportunity with respect to through not only UW but other institutions, other schools, other colleges, other institutions like hospitals and medical facilities. But still, these barriers that UW have are not unique to UW. These barriers exist for a lot of other institutions. And we as a state university, as a land-grant university, I think could really make a difference with documenting what we've learned and, you know, with a little bit like the tolerances we have, I guess, start to try to help build some of this infrastructure, like the food hub, like these relationships with Golden Produce. So I think, you know, with respect to making an impact on Wisconsin agriculture, in terms of dairy, we have some local sources, we have Organic Valley, and we have some of that infrastructure already in place, but contributing to the building of that infrastructure with respect to vegetables going into other institutions, I think would be a huge role for UW to play.
I think I would say, and it's probably just because this is working well for us, but just dairy and purchasing dairy. We've got all of our milk. We put in our contracts that our cheese has to be from Wisconsin. We buy yogurt from Sugar River Dairy, so all of the parfaits that we purchase have Sugar River Dairy yogurt. It's a way, I want to say say it's easy, but it's a product that we can easily work into our normal menu cycles, our ordering cycles. It's just very part of the normal day for staff to be able to order within our systems and plan their menus, and it flows, and with how busy everybody is, I think it's just, it was a good place for us to start and grow purchases.
Do you have anything to add, Paige, or anyone?
And just going along with this, I'm going to take a stab at California. Just with the, we're from Wisconsin. We know dairy pretty well, and we know what a cow looks like and a happy cow. But sometimes we kind of lose that connection to why we're eating Wisconsin cheese. Yeah, it tastes better than California cheese, but the animals. Yep, that's a shot at Trader Joe's. But the animals are, the farmers care about them, and telling the students in a very engaging and interactive way why this actually matters that they're eating cheese from Wisconsin.
Great. That was really interesting, again, to hear sort of the connections aspect, I think is one thing that came through everyone's, Jeff, you mentioned the price point and sort of the cost of meat, and I know a lot of, one of the big sort of criticisms and barriers towards, more local or sustainable food is the cost. And I'm just sort of wondering if everyone here would like to weigh in on sort of what would be the fiscal implications if we, increase purchasing, real food or sustainable food, or whatever term you use to describe, eating in the way you like.
I'm going to give it to Erin.
I think I'm probably going to give it to Jeff, because I think it's working with him. And again, this is something that I think we need to look at a strategy, a short, mid, long-term strategy for. But from talking to Jeff, I think that there are some ways that potentially we can start this that won't necessarily put too much pressure on students, but the university wouldn't be responsible necessarily for picking up the extra cost. But I do think and this is just a personal viewpoint, we do need to be aware of people's economic realities too. And giving people choices and trying to, looking more holistically about overall costs of food and purchasing of the end product, look at strategic ways to integrate more local food. And I'll talk, and Jeff has some of these strategies which I think are great, but we're a diverse student population, a diverse staff and faculty population that have different realities with return to finances, and that has to be respected as well.
I guess I see us as not being the cops to tell our customers what they must eat, and this is not a small private college that may attract students based in part on that we get everything from these 6 growers with dirt under their fingernails and that sort of thing, and that may be why they come to college there. We're it's a big public institution with a lot of people who come here, and they need to get fed, and so we look for opportunities where, and as I mentioned before, we're a la carte. So that what that means is if our customers will pay for it, we can sell it. So we try to, we always are aware of cost, but sometimes it makes sense for us to buy something maybe a little bit more expensive because we think it's just better, and we think that our customers will agree. And in the case of the burgers and the greens and those sorts of things, people have agreed. We were just looking at eggs the other day, and the fella I used to buy my eggs from when I was in the restaurant business said, hey, I want to sell you my organic eggs. I said, well, yeah, they're terrific. And I couldn't remember how much they cost. They're 3 times the cost of the eggs we get now. And those are the sorts of things that's like, I don't know if we could do that. I don't know if our customers would bear that cost. And so going back to the idea, we're not the cops, so it's our job, I think, to offer those choices. So, we could we thought we could afford to and that our customers could afford to make that switch to the grass-fed burger. I'm not sure our customers would be able to afford the switch to the organic eggs, as an example.
But again, like the strategic purchasing, like the leafy greens, they cost more, but if you're looking at the student purchasing, you know, a salad by weight, it may not translate that much to the end product. Or if you're looking at, you know, putting some leaves on a hamburger, it may not translate to the end price of that hamburger. So there's, I think, in terms of, you know, looking at this transition of, you know, strategically, what can we add even at a higher price that wouldn't necessarily have a huge impact on food service budget and wouldn't necessarily have a huge impact on what the student pays. I think that there's ways to do it, but you have to be strategic about where you start.
Yeah, the single biggest produce item in terms of dollar purchases is cut pineapple. So I don't know if there's going to be any local sustainable pineapple anytime soon, but as Erin was mentioning, when we looked at the overall cost of what happens on our salad bar, the leafy greens really didn't have that much of an impact overall on what it costs us versus what our customers would purchase. So, but again, we have to look at each thing kind of case by case and figure out, well, you know, will our customers follow that? And I think some of the strategies that Erin's talking about in terms of, like, well, maybe there's one place where we could offer this, and maybe it's going to be more there. But if it's, but maybe you create the demand right there, and that is, you know, you drive customers to that location, instead of just saying from now on all of our sliced tomatoes are going to, you know, guess what? We're only going to have sliced tomatoes in September, and the rest of the time we're not going to have them because we believe in this. I don't think they'd stand for that, but to feature some of those things in a smaller setting, I think that you provide those choices.
I'm just curious, did you run a pilot program for the grass-fed beef, or was it, okay?
Just jumped in.
Okay, well, would that be something you would do in the future to test these things out, maybe just at Gordon Commons, or would you just, after a panel of 8 administrative staff members thinking this is a dank burger, I'm going to throw it on there? Just, yeah, what would the process be?
What kinds of things are we talking about?
Say the eggs, just for an example.
The eggs. I think the eggs would be, I guess, just looking at the cost, I would say, I'm not sure we could just make that switch, because we go through a lot of eggs. Mm-hmm. But I think saying, okay, for example, at Gordon, we have a breakfast all day long station. So maybe featuring those eggs, just if you're buying, you know, I'm getting an omelet, or I'm getting, you know, a couple of over easy eggs. There again, as I mentioned before, that connection. So, you know, if you're saying, well, that cake you have had local eggs in it, that again, it's more of an attenuated connection. But the eggs, I'm getting eggs today, so that may be this, and that we've talked about that. Angie and I talked about that too. That, you know, maybe that's a place to sort of carve those things out and pilot those things. We can't get too, you know, change comes with difficulty in a big institution, and so, you know, changing things up sometimes presents problems. But I think, you know, you pick your spots and introduce these new things, and then my goal overall is, you know, hopefully change becomes just the norm for everybody.
Cool. So it was really great to hear all of that. And I think one thing, and now getting to the point Tom made earlier, one thing I've heard a lot throughout this whole panel is education. And, you know, educating people about where their food is coming from, or the face that grows their food. And I'm just wondering if any of you have sort of any ideas for, you know, how we could actually get into the nuts and bolts of that education. You know, say 2 years from now, we want, you know, freshmen to know, I don't know, their eggs at Gordon Commons come from this, you know, local farm. You know, how do we get, you know, change our education so we can get there? Because that seems to be the direction that a lot of the solution is heading, from what I've heard.
Yeah, so like as a student who clearly cares about what I'm consuming, you know, whenever I talk to dining services, a lot of the time they say, you know, we need to have like the student demand for it. Like if there's student demand for it, the changes will happen. And I totally believe in that to some extent. But, you know, so as a student who's involved in organizations that emphasize education, you know, we are doing active steps to try to educate our classmates and freshmen on the importance of food. I think that's limited just in the sense that we are student organizations that run partially on volunteer hours, and it's not, you know, completely feasible for us to reach every student. So it is limited in our stance. However, I think, you know, the University of Wisconsin-Madison is, you know, an exceptional institution. It's a world-class institution, and every time we do anything, it's always with the expectation that we're going to excel in it. In the same sense, I think we should be looking at how, when students come into the dining halls, that's another opportunity for education. So, you know, I know for a fact when I was in the dining halls, I would read those brochures on the tables and have, you know, whatever that was on there, I was having a conversation with others or with myself about what I was reading. I think having good food in the dining halls is another way to further education. So for me, I think there's a beauty in autonomy, and choice. So for example, I think with the eggs, you know, if you have an option of organic or non-organic, I think it starts a conversation with students. And, you know, some students may choose not to select the organic, but they're having that conversation where they're making the choice. Maybe not today, I'm not going to buy organic because I can't afford it, but in the future, they've thought about it and they can aspire to something along those lines. I mean, there's always going to be people who don't care about what they eat, unfortunately. But I think, you know, having a conversation, even if it's not the one that I want to have about what they're eating, is the very least an institution like Wisconsin can do. So.
And Paige likes brochures, but not everyone does. And as the freshmen come up, they are coming in with lessened attention span, more media-centric, and I think looking at new, innovative ways to engage students. I mean, I'm biased because I make videos and I think they're really fun, but making real food, or whatever you want to call it, sexier, and just saying this is kind of the cool thing, the hip thing to do. And brochures attract some people, and signage does as well, but you have to look at new and innovative ways and tangible ways, like having edible landscapes that start the conversation because you can either feel some sort of emotion or you connect to it in some way. And through certain methods of kind of traditional ways of educating people, it doesn't work as well now, especially for a topic that we've all got it ingrained in our minds what we think of food.
It's been a couple years since I was a college freshman, so things are so different now, so it's hard for me to remember what it would be like, what would have reached me, and you know, it was a matter of getting enough food back then. But I think when we met with Paige and some other students, I gave a strategy for them, because Angie and I get to make a lot of decisions. We don't get to make all the decisions. And I can assure you, and remember that, and I wish Carl were here, Carl Kors from the union, because you know they're different. They, you know, when you walk in here, you know these are restaurants in a sense. We have people who live with us, and despite that, we're having a real growing segment of our customer base as non-resident students, faculty, and staff. That's still our constituent population that's our mission, to serve those folks. And so as a strategy, to get them on your side as soon as you can, and to speak to the people who really make the big decisions in housing, that will move mountains. Because you know, we can you know, make the moves that we're making, but when there's a real directive from up above that says this is where we're going, then we can really jump in as much as we want.
And I think going off that, you know, when approached with the concept that there needs to be a demand from students, I always agree, but I also think that it should be a priority for the university to want to take the steps for this. So I agree with Jeff that like upper administrative support for it would be paramount in creating a food system that really emphasizes, you know, food as a means of education. So it should be part of that conversation with upper administrative.
I guess this may be a slightly different approach to education, but one of the, I think, the real innovative things that have come out of some of the initiatives of the Office of Sustainability is the fact that food has started to enter into other classes beyond CALs, and using some of the real hands-on projects that really seem to excite people, you know, really an example of what change is actually happening, what are we doing, some real world problem solving. So potentially you'd be using some of these issues and some of these challenges that we're facing and having that into classes and engaging students beyond the ag students and really getting, you know, multiple disciplines and multiple minds onto these solutions so that you know, the actual coursework is integrated within some of the activities here on the UW-Madison campus.
I have two things I want to say here. One, when you were talking about having the option of purchasing an organic or a non-organic egg when you go to the counter, we're not able to have that option, or we really struggle with it, because how do we get it through the cash register that the person that chose the organic egg, how are they going to pay more? We struggled with that with different things. Do you try to put it on a different plate? You know, it's just, when you get a long line of customers at the registers, the cashiers are going to hit the first egg button that they see. So we just struggle with that. And then also, just going back to the education piece then, we talk about that all the time. How do we educate our customers or promote things that we're doing within dining? We have the table tents on the tables. We have message TVs in the dining units in the residence halls. What are they reading? What are they not reading? We did a promotion on the table tents, I think, for the burgers, but if you ask our residents and customers if we're serving grass-fed burgers, will they know? I don't know. So we struggle with that all the time, how to reach people.
All right. Well,
Just something off Erin, just a tangible thing she's talking about with coursework. The new organic crop production class, which is pretty monumental for a class, aims to be interdisciplinary, and not just for crunchy hort and agronomy students to engage in this, but people from any discipline to learn about food and growing food. And I think those courses just keep popping up, and it is becoming more closer to a norm than just these extreme classes that only a few people are going to be attracted to.
all right. Well, I'm just about out of questions. We have 30 minutes left. So the last question I have before I open it up for a few minutes of audience questioning. This discussion has been really, I found it really interesting, and I think it's been really useful in just feeling out where people are and what perspectives they're coming from. And just moving forward from this discussion at the end of the semester, what tangible steps can we all, the audience and you all, the panelists, take to see some of the ideas, some of the education, some of the, increased, experimenting with local food and food connected to farmers? What action steps can we take, in the next semester, in the next year, to see some of these things becoming more of a norm on campus? That's a big question as well. So
Paige, you want to talk? She's doing some really great workshop and new outreach opportunities for slow food that pretty much just education. So.
Oh, it's not supposed to talk.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So next semester, we're kind of for slow food. We're launching all educational programs. So we're gonna have workshop series that are gonna be both introductory cooking classes as well as more, I guess, artisanal cooking classes that allow people who already like to cook to kind of expand upon that. So those will be twice a month, and then we're working with 3 of the learning communities. So Chadbourne, the Multicultural and International Learning Community. We're going to do 3-week series with their residents on kind of first the importance of cooking for yourself, the cultural importance of cooking with others, and then last kind of an introductory to food as an issue framed around, I don't know, the multicultural learning community is very interested in issues of social justice, so using that frame to talk about food. International learning community is very interested in different cultures and cuisine, so that's perfect for food. I think in all of these situations, food so easily can be the center of a conversation on anyone's interest just because you're able to, it really touches upon so many issues. So really finding a there's going to be, for everyone, there's going to be a different way of being interested in food. Jeff loves just good quality food. I care significantly about the social issues surrounding food, but we're here together talking on this panel because in the end it leads to just wanting to eat good food. So, finding different lenses through which to have those conversations I think is the most important thing. So there's not going to be one cure-all answer to starting a conversation, but understanding that food is diverse, people are diverse, and you're going to be able to find a way to connect those two. It's really important.
And just as an example of conversations starting through just student activities, we have a 8-foot long compost trailer. We have 2 of them that we also use to, FH King uses to transport vegetables and food waste from around the city. And we might be growing in the middle of campus, but no one talks to us about that as much as this 8-foot trailer. It's just a whale on the street, and it starts conversations about maybe compost or food waste or why this thing smells so terrible, but then you can veer that towards a conversation about why we're doing it and what reason this is important. And just having those tangible things that are on campus that starts the conversation is really important. And that leads to FH King wanting to do more things on campus involving growing, because currently, as I said before, the Eagle Heights Garden is a little out of the range of many students, and our Pyle Center Garden is something like the grass-fed burger that not many people know about. And we want to have these little pockets, like in front of Ag Hall they have Swiss chard growing. Does anyone know why they have that growing? So it's just using that as a tool to start the conversation, and then getting people involved in the classroom opportunities and the internships that are abound. There's a ton of them.
One of the things I'm working on and continue to work on is the training of our staff, because if we can help sort of raise the skill level of our staff, it enables us to have more flexibility with what we choose to serve. And then also, giving them some pride in what they do as culinary professionals and connecting them more with the products that they're using. And I think ultimately, if I can get them on board with those sorts of things, that the customer is going to go along. Those are the people who are going to be selling the products to the customers, not me. And so I think that's a really big, important thing, and that's something I can have an effect on. That would go far beyond, say, just choosing this product or that product. And I think it would have an impact, not just with respect to products, but with the quality of life of our staff and how it would come through in the quality of what we do.
One thing that we'll be doing as part of this Leafy Green project is sending out a student survey that asks some questions about purchasing preferences and priorities on different food categories like local and organic. So I'd encourage you, when you see that come across your email, to respond to that survey and encourage others that you think might be interested to respond, because we will be incorporating those responses into a report and hopefully documenting what purchasing behavior or purchasing preferences might be.
And I think just trying to think about what we would be successful at, what would actually work for our staff. how can we incorporate it into our menus and ordering system and current vendors if possible, and just trying to make it easy which products we could start with, focus on that and build on that.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I think we should give our panelists a round of applause. And now I'll open it up to audience questions. What I'll do is I'll just point at people. Since we only have one mic, we'll keep it down here so I don't have to run back and forth with the mic, which, though would be entertaining, might not be the most efficient use of our time. So does anyone have questions for our panelists regarding anything we discussed today?
I think this is probably a question for Jeff, but anyone can take it. I was really interested, like probably many of us, to hear about the success of the grass-fed beef. So can you share a different example of a big failure where you introduced something, I mean, in the spirit of what we're talking about, and why it was not successful, and what we learned from that experiment?
I haven't experienced any failures. Yeah. Is there anything that we really just didn't work? No. No. Sorry.
We often learn a lot from our failures.
Right. No, we haven't screwed anything up badly enough.
We could talk. Hi, I'm Julie. I'm from University Housing. And we had some experience, I would say, would it be 5 years back or so, Angie? And we were really at the point where we had an organic, local, or what we deemed a locally sourced item on at every meal. We had gone that far. And sales didn't support that. And I wouldn't say that was necessarily a failure, but we at the time really thought that's where we needed to go. And it clearly wasn't the way to go in terms of what the residents were buying from us, or else we weren't putting it out there in a way where they understood what they were buying from us. So we pulled back from that somewhat.
Hi, I'm Bartlett, Black Earth Meats, Conscious Carnivore. Leonie says hi, Aaron. I just want to say, the system is so insane, and you guys know it, you're in the middle. I mean, so, first of all, let me just say, you guys are awesome, keep doing it. This really is a customer-driven thing. You can't possibly convert your whole university to organic, or should you? The entire university is funded by, what, BST and commercial dairies and all that. I mean, that's what got going. So as much as I'm on the other side, I appreciate that. So it's kind of an awkward thing we're talking about here as far as Wisconsin ag, where it's getting pushed into bigger and bigger. So I hope you guys understand that. What I find interesting, would be fascinating to see, this is probably Jeff, but it's going to fall right on you, but the success of Slow Food Cafe is just magnificent. And that is teaching those students how to cook, which is a critical life skill that has dropped out of the whole scheme of our worlds. It's revolutionary, it's seasonal, and it's smaller scale. Why couldn't that be duplicated at 1 or 2 places on campus where you get to take your skills and actually get the work-study students with you and actually train those skills in a smaller area, and let supply and demand rule from there? If that becomes overwhelmed, you start expanding it out. If it lingers and dies in the vine, well, you tried.
So you're saying providing training to student employees in how to cook professionally?
In specific cafeterias, like 1 cafeteria or 2 cafeterias, at least 2 at the Union. Mm-hmm. At the Union, we had a full training program. I was a building manager at the Memorial Union. It was awesome, best job ever. And we had to train everybody down in that kitchen how to use a knife, proper food sanitation. It was a pain in the ass, but it was all work study. It was part of our duty as the union bosses or whatever we were to do that, and we got service out of it. And it seems like, I mean, you've got to do that with people walking in the door anyway. It seems like if you get the right people in the right places, that might work really well.
Yeah, I mean, my focus right now is on the training of our permanent staff and elevating that. I think that's a terrific idea. I would need them for more than 4 hours a week. Mm-hmm. Training people to cook, it takes a great deal of time, and I don't know if you were here earlier for the discussion, we were talking about the ratio we have of student employees to permanent employees. It's a tremendous number of student employees, and just you don't know if they're gonna work the same station twice in a week, or where we're gonna be able to put them. But I do like the idea of if there were students who, you know, through work study or some kind of commitment of time, and you know, if they don't show up, they don't get credit. I like that.
I think back to my experience where, I mean, it seems like every other friend I had was working at a restaurant somewhere, you know, sous chef or whatever, and we've got to be able to harness that kind of energy, because there are enough of us out there. I mean, I'm an old guy now, I guess, but thinking back, there are enough of us in the food world anyway who wanted those skills, and to do it within the university, doing something they believe in a controlled, supervised environment where they can go two ways, seems pretty exciting.
I'm all ears.
All right. Excellent. Oh, by the way, just personal plug, come visit Conscious Carnivore in the university, and find us on Facebook. I'm in the fight with the village of Black Earth right now, and I need some love, so.
What are you fighting about?
They want to kick me out.
That's bad.
It's bad.
Hello, thanks everybody. You guys, it's really super enlightening. I love what you are saying. I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about how you manage it, like sustainable food waste, whether it be, you know, letting people take stuff home. What kind of realms do you have in sustainable food disposal?
We're on a small scale, we're going large scale.
There's actually a fabulous facility just about 6 miles west of town, the UW-Madison Ag Station, just past the Target and the Beltline. And a lot of the food waste, not the post-consumer waste, so one of the limitations to post-consumer waste is, I think at one point they did have compost bins, but people would throw in spoons and knives and all sorts of things. So any pre-consumer waste though, any waste coming out of the kitchen goes to the UW-Madison Ag Facility, and they have a state-of-the-art composting facility there. Beautiful composting coming out, large scale windrows, and they're a very popular source for organic producers. So definitely I would say there's really good recycling of pre-consumer food scraps, but the post-consumer, again, because of that issue, they just didn't have the capacity to filter out all that other stuff that was going into the compost bins, unfortunately. Still trying to figure out a solution for that.
Maybe Julie knows more about
Yeah,
the
Julie told us
composting
about the
efforts.
composting and
Frank,
pulvers.
We've got a great expert. But I think we've made inroads with the post-consumer due to the implementation. In our new builds, we have pulpers. And I think we've tripled, what are the factoids on that, Frank?
Yeah, so.
Tripled what we're contributing because it's not going.
Maybe not triple, but double.
Yeah, okay. Triple's good.
That's a big double.
Our problem now is post-consumer in the unions, because you just can't keep the contaminants out. And as was said, we have 2 windrows out there that we really can't do anything with until we get a sifter or a screening device to screen out the contaminants. So we're trying a new concept here at Union South. We just installed 2 lids on the compost bins, and overnight the contaminants decreased. Simply because to throw something in there, they had to lift the lid. So the people throwing something in there were people that knew what they were doing.
Apart from the like compost, just to follow up with that, as far as on like food that, you know, you're not going to want to sell the next day, but you know, it'd still be good enough to eat. So how much involvement do you have with like donating to different food banks or shelters? Or?
We do donate to Salvation Army and Second Harvest. We kind of go as needed throughout the semester, and then usually at the end of the semesters, like here at winter break next week, and then usually at the end of the spring semester, we have larger quantities that go of things that just didn't sell, milk and bread and things like that.
Yeah, because I know that, I mean, part of the education question that we're all talking about, I think, would be teaching people how to, you know, be conscious consumers. You know, what am I going to put on my plate that I'm not going to eat? So oftentimes you walk by and you see the kind of food that's being disposed by people simply because they didn't make a proper individual choice about, okay, am I going to choose to actually finish this, you know, teriyaki thing or am I not? So I think that's something we also need to be conscious about as far as getting people to be conscious about their own kind of choice and what are they going to eat so they don't actually have to throw it away, because once it's on their plate, they can't really give it back. So it need to be put into the system.
Absolutely. We have time for maybe one or for sure one, maybe two other questions. Does anyone else have a question out in the audience?
Yeah, so before you had talked about pilot programs. We'd also mentioned how a lot of people come to the university not necessarily sharing ideals like this, and we need to cater to those people too. And so it's difficult to test new ideas on them. I was wondering if there has been discussion or implementation of pilot programs specifically on greenhouse learning community, which is kind of a captive consumer base of students who have deliberately chosen to live in housing that is sustainable.
Yeah, I saw Alan here, and Alan left, but I know from working with Alan, they have, I think the greenhouse learning community, I'm pretty sure has meals that they specifically gear towards local or different types of food. And they plan the menu together, and they specifically source product. And I think they even work with Dejo to integrate. Yeah, so I know that they are doing some of that.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
And the meals to the greenhouse learning community for their community meals have a long-term history with that focus. Because I worked with them. Here I go, my 4 or 5 years back, but we started out doing it that way, and I suspect it's just even taken off more from what we used to do.
Yeah, and I think.
But as far as test subjects, I don't think we've test marketed necessarily on that community group.
I think
it's more of a catered for them.
Yeah, I think my understanding of it too is a lot of the students come in with notions of food as an issue. So I would be actually more interested in like trying to implement something like that into dorms that like Witty or Celery, that people probably don't have any of those notions of environmental concern or food as an issue, because I think that's a better audience for trying to educate than people who probably are naturally geared to care about it. So, not that they don't matter too, but.
I see one more question out there, and I think that'll be our last.
It's not a question, it's, we're both from the greenhouse learning community, so we can kind of.
Yeah.
There are, like, as you were saying, there are a lot of people who are more geared towards looking at what they eat in our community, but there are also a lot of people who aren't, who kind of just join the community just because, you know, it looks like something interesting that they don't know anything about. And so, I mean, we have an entire mix on that floor, and so I like the idea of piloting it towards something like that, and then also expanding it towards other dorms. But speaking as someone from the greenhouse, I think it would be valuable for us, because we do cook together a lot, and that, like, I know it just brings our entire community closer together. But
it's not the whole community that comes together and cook. There are definitely only a handful of people who share the experience of making the meal and going and sometimes buying it from local stores, but it's definitely not the whole learning community. The learning community is not just focused on sustainability, it's focused on a lot of things. Food is only a part of it, so it would be cool if we can grow that and make it as one of the main points of the learning community.
Cool. I think we are about at time, more or less. So once again, thank you all for coming out. Thank you to our panelists for coming out. This was a really great event. I really enjoyed, you know, all the discussion that happened and all the ideas and thoughts that people had. It was really valuable, both for me on a personal level, and I hope it was valuable for you. So with that, I'm looking forward to seeing the directions that this conversation will take in the semester, next year, next 2 years, and moving forward, just seeing how we can be, I see sustainability as not as an endpoint, but as a constantly moving goal, and I think, so long as we're moving towards that, I think that's a really, an admirable target. So with that, good luck on finals for those of you who are students, and happy Friday for the rest of you.
Thank you.